Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to all the participants who have joined us for this session. Would take the opportunity to introduce you all with the speaker of the day, Shri BSV Murthy sir. A science graduate from Mysore University, Shri BSV Murthy joined Customs and Central Excise Service in 1979 after emerging successful in civil services examination and ended his career as a member of the last fact-finding body in the dispute resolution system for indirect taxes, the Customs, Excise and Service Tax Appellate Tribunal. He also successfully completed BL degree course in law, which is while in service in 1995. During his career as an officer, he was part of the project steering committee for development of risk management system in customs, part of the team which developed an audit manual in collaboration with the Canadian revenue officers, part of the Indian delegation to Sri Lanka, Nepal in relation to customs work, part of committees set up for considering refund system, staffing in central excise, etc. He also underwent training in The Hague in Netherlands and in Ottawa in Canada during his service. He received Presidential Award for Distinguished Service Record in year 2005. During his career, he held posts which gave him an all-round exposure in all the areas of indirect taxes. And for 7 years from 2008, he was a member of the tribunal and retired from service on 17 July 2015. After retirement, he continues his work in indirect taxes and is presently actively involved in GST implementation. I am honored to welcome Sri BSV Murthy sir to enlighten us on today's topic, that is integrated role of GST and customs, including EOU and SEZ. And I am sure that each one of us would gain a lot from it. Over to you, Murthy sir.
Good afternoon to all the participants and welcome. So today's subject is integrated. There is a need for understanding the GST and customs relationship. In fact, I will be covering the topic under the following heads. First, I will give a brief introduction. Thereafter, we will look at some relevant definitions which we should know before we get into the subject. Thereafter, we will talk about imports and exports. In both cases, we will be discussing the provisions in GST and the provisions in customs, how they are related. Because even though imports and exports of goods, mainly customs is concerned, but they are very closely related and with the Indian manufacturers and traders. Therefore, we have to know the relationship between the two, and customs provisions also we should be aware. And lastly, I will talk about export promotion schemes also, which basically we should know so that we get the benefit of the schemes and also reduce our expenses in export and increase our exports and benefit the country. So firstly, we will go to introduction to the subject. The purpose of customs and GST law, when we talk of imports and international trade, is to provide a level playing field to the domestic manufacturers, domestic traders, so that they can compete with international suppliers and also make our exports competitive. If we start exporting the taxes, our exporters cannot compete with the normal international trade. Therefore, both the laws, whether it is customs or GST, one of the aims is to provide a level playing field. That means you are able to compete with the international traders, international suppliers. Now, for this purpose, in the GST law, what they have done is they have defined interstate trade, and this interstate trade is basically applicable when it is defined supply of goods or services or both, when the supplier is located in India and the place of supply is outside India, or of course we treat special economic zone also a foreign location. Therefore, If the supplier is located in India and the place of supply is SEZ, or the recipient is a SEZ developer or a special economic zone unit, then what happens is it becomes an interstate trade, even though it is not exactly interstate trade. Interstate trade in IGST Act is when the location of the supplier and the place of supply are located in two different states. It is called interstate supply. The same definition when the location of supply is and the place of supply, location of the supplier and the place of supply, when they are outside India and within India, it becomes export or import depending upon the situation. So these are treated even when the goods are coming from outside India or goods are going outside India, it is treated as interstate trade for the purposes of levy of indirect taxes. Now, where do we get the support for this? We all know that unless the Constitution provides for it, the Parliament cannot enact the law, and unless the Parliament makes the enactment, you cannot collect the tax. So Article 269A defines this, and therefore Parliament could enact IGST Act to levy IGST on the goods which are being imported or exported, or the services which are being imported or exported. Now, therefore, what happens is there are various enactments related to indirect taxes like CGST Act, SGST Act, IGST Act, Customs Act. Then we have foreign trade policy, which is basically to promote exports and also to regulate imports, a handbook of policy and procedure, notifications issued, circulars issued together. All these together form an integrated scheme of indirect taxation. Therefore, one important thing to be noted is, even though foreign trade policy defines what exactly are the goods that can be imported, exported, restricted, prohibited, whatever the terms are used there, ultimately, they do not override the tax laws. So if the foreign trade policy says a particular item, when it is imported into India, the new duty need not be paid. For example, advance authorization scheme, which enables people to import for the manufacture of goods which are to be exported. For that, even though foreign trade policy says that goods can be imported free subject to this condition, etc., etc., if there is no exemption notification in the Customs Act, customs duty has to be paid. Therefore, the integration takes place. The customs provisions, the indirect tax provision, GST law, and the foreign trade policy, all of them have to be integrated, and together they form, and one doesn't override the other, and they have to be cohesive and together. There should not be contradiction between each other. As far as the foreign trade policy is concerned, DGFT is the final authority. So if there is any doubt or dispute about any particular clause in the foreign trade policy, the reference is made to the DGFT. Whatever clarification the DGFT issues, DGFT is Director General of Foreign Trade. He works under Commerce Ministry. It's an organization under Commerce Ministry. So he is the final authority as far as interpretation of foreign trade policy is concerned. Now what happens is, many times the foreign trade policy announcements are made. If there is no corresponding customs notification, there will be problems. Similarly, sometimes what happens, customs gets a doubt, or customs says you are not eligible. Then if it is a customs notification, it is always better to seek remedy within the customs. Because if you go to DGFT, even if the DGFT says he is eligible, the solution may not be accepted by customs. In fact, to give what I will do is, when I'm going along, some examples as and when it comes, as and when I feel the need, I give then and there rather than putting them together at the end. One example is, when I was a commissioner, there was a person who wanted to export leather. He was a regular exporter of leather goods. So he knew that his goods are exempt. But our customs people held up the consignment in the port saying that no, you are not eligible for exemption, you have to pay export duty. Then he said, he made a reference to DGFT. Now what happened? The goods got held up. The DGFT had to clarify, and DGFT was taking their own time. For 1 week, 10 days, nothing happened. Finally, he came to me. Then I went through the exemption notification of customs and found that he was eligible. And our officers in the docks had made a mistake of not seeing the latest notification. This was the problem. So the solution was in the notification. Reference was made to DGFT. Therefore, you have to approach the correct authority for resolving your problems. If you go to the wrong person, then also there can be difficulties. And another one is the authorities, whichever is the department, whether it is DGFT or customs or CGST, GST, whichever law you take, there has to be an understanding of the problems of the trade. In the initial days of GST, we had problems relating to high sea sales. High sea sales was a concept well known to customs. Now what happened at the time of implementation of IGST, it was not sufficient thought was not given to it, because customs import is always understood to bring something into India. The moment we think of India, we think of territorial waters, which is supposed to be 12 nautical miles from the baseline. Whereas the definition of India has been amended, and consequently now it extends up to economic zone, which is 200 nautical miles. Now high sea sales can take place anywhere. It can take place beyond 12 miles also. But then our GST officer said, no, you have to pay IGST, and there was a confusion. So finally they had to issue, they have included it in the schedule, and they have said it is not a supply, it is not liable. So these three kind of problems come when there is no cohesion between the law and the trade practice and different laws in the country. Similarly, we had problem with warehousing. That also was solved subsequently. And then now also we have a problem. For example, in case of IGST, you can take credit only on the basis of bill of entry when you have imported the goods. Now, quite often what happens is, if there is a mistake in payment of tax, subsequently you pay the amount through challan. If you pay through the challan, credit cannot be taken. This is a problem for which we don't know when the solution will come. Otherwise, you end up losing the IGST payments made without filing the bill of entry, because bill of entry is the only document on the basis of which credit of IGST on imports can be taken. So with this brief introduction, we will go further and go into first step is to understand some of the definitions. Now IGST Act uses the words customs frontiers of India. It says, because in IGST the words used is when the goods cross customs frontiers of India. That is the event for levy of IGST, and it has to be collected with the customs duties. Now customs frontiers of India is not a term used in Customs Act. Customs Act uses the term customs area. So what IGST Act has done is, it says customs frontiers of India means the limits of the customs area as defined in section 2. Now customs area means the area of a customs station including a warehouse. This amendment, a warehouse was included as a customs area just before GST Act came into force. Earlier, warehouse was not a customs area. Customs area was basically the area where the imported goods are kept before their clearance in a customs station or a customs port. In customs port, the commissioner has power to say goods will be kept here. So till the goods are taken out of customs area, they are considered as imported goods. Only when they become the part of the land mass, they cease to be imported goods and they become part of the goods of the country. Now, when we talk of imported goods, it means that they are yet to be cleared from customs. They have come, goods have come, and they are in the customs area. Only after the bill of entry for home consumption is filed, then only we can say the goods have ceased to be imported goods. So these goods are customs area or a warehouse is the area where goods are ordinarily kept before clearance by customs authorities. So subsequently again warehouse, because it is a customs area, the tax has to be paid, including the value at which the goods are cleared from customs area. This problem came. Subsequently, necessary amendments have been made. Now the situation is clear. For customs duty, the value at which the goods are imported at the time of filing, we call it into bond bill of entry, because these are called bonded warehouses or bonded places. When the goods are moved into warehouse, you have to file a bill of entry, and in that the value and the classification are invariably decided. That value will be used for the purpose of levy of basic customs duty. Whereas if the goods have been sold while in the warehouse, that value will be adopted for levy of IGST. This is some principles which problems arose and solutions have been found. So according to IGST Act, supply of goods imported into the territory of India shall be treated to be supply of goods in the course of interstate trade or commerce. Now, warehouses, there are three categories of warehouses: public warehouse, private warehouse, and a special warehouse. Public warehouse is a place where goods from various people can be kept there. Private warehouse is for the person, his own use, his own industry, it will be used. Special warehouse is for the goods which are notified by the government. What is the meaning of export? Export of goods means taking goods out of India to a place out of India. Taking goods of India to a place outside India. This is export. Now, for the purposes of section 147, there is a concept of deemed export, because we have established special economic zones, and when you send goods to special economic zones, they are considered as deemed exports. Even though goods do not leave the country and payment may be received in Indian rupee also or free foreign exchange, they are considered as deemed exports. And we also have other definitions. Other goods have been added because government has the power to notify other cases where such exports also can be considered as deemed. But in the case of deemed exports, under section 147, that is export to SEZ, goods can be sent without payment of duty. In other cases, it has to be sent on payment of tax or duty. The next one is SION, Standard Input Output Norms. This basically provides details of inputs required and the quantity for production of a particular unit of a product. This is called Standard Input Output Norms. These are used for issue of advance authorization scripts, duty-free import authorizations, etc. Because then you don't have to work out how much input is required to produce a particular item, because the quantity is straight away available there, and for that quantity the authorization or license will be issued. So Sion. Then next, what is the meaning of export of services? Export of services means the supply of any service when the supplier is located in India, recipient is outside India, place of supply of service is outside India, and payment has been received by the supplier of service in convertible foreign exchange. This is the usual requirement. However, in some cases, RBI has permitted receipt of Indian currency also for exports. The examples are exports to Nepal and Bhutan. So in those cases, even money can be received in Indian rupees also. Then also it will be considered as export. Then one more thing we have to remember. Export, if there are many companies who have branches abroad. Now, if the recipient is not merely an establishment of the person, that means I am a company, I have a branch in England. If I have a branch, then it is not considered as export. Even if I export it to my branch, that is not considered as export. Remember, the opposite is not true. If I import something from the branch, even if I don't pay money, value will be arrived at and I have to pay tax. It is considered as import. It is not considered as not an import just because I am importing from my branch. So this is the difference between import and export of service. This is the major difference, because if I import from my branch, it's an import. And even if I am importing it free, I may have to pay tax. If I export, it is not an export. Then we come to an intermediary. Now what happens is, this is a term which is we have to know, because many times what you think is an agent or what you think is an intermediary may not be so according to law. The problem in the case of intermediary is, when the service is provided by an intermediary, the place of supply is the place of intermediary. Then what happens is, even if other conditions are fulfilled, quite often when you think I am doing an export if of service or whatever it is, if it is through an intermediary, quite often it may be treated as not an export. Therefore, we have to know the difference between an intermediary and the agent. If you see the definition says an intermediary means a broker, an agent, or any other person by whatever name called, who between two or more persons either arranges or facilitates supply of goods or services or both. An intermediary cannot change the nature of supply as provided by the principal. He will not act as a principal. So these are some of the points. Intermediary concept is very important to understand. And whenever you are doing something through an agent or intermediary, it is better to understand the legal principles involved, see whether it amounts to export or not before treating it as an export. This is very important. Next one is fixed establishment. Now, I said earlier that branch. Now, many times what happens is, fixed establishment is defined to mean a place other than the registered place of business, which is characterized by a sufficient degree of permanence and suitable structure in terms of human and technical resources to supply services or to receive and use services for its own needs. Now, whether a service is received by me in India or by somebody else outside. Now, if I have a fixed establishment which has the capability in terms of human and technical resources to supply services, if they get an order and execute it abroad themselves on their own, execute agreement, etc., etc., then what happens is, this is a transaction outside the country. Whereas if it is not a fixed establishment, you may be treated, the principal who is located in India or who is located abroad, as the case may be, will be treated as the receiver or the supplier. Therefore, fixed establishment assumes importance. For example, within the country, let us take an example. Supposing I have a commercial building in Chennai and I am located in Bangalore. Now, I will tell the fellow that I have nobody in Chennai. I can't do any service to you. You pay me the rent, maintenance. I will not take any responsibility for anything. If that is the case, then what happens? Place of supply will be Chennai. I am located in Bangalore. It becomes IGST. Supposing I have one individual, I will say you go to Murthy. He will take care of your problems, and you can pay the rent to him, etc., etc. When I say that, I have a fixed establishment. Then what happens is place of supply is Chennai. Location of supplier is also Chennai because I have a fixed establishment. The levy will be CGST and SGST. This is how the fixed establishment concept works. Now, the next one is definition of India for customs purposes is up to territorial waters. But for GST purposes, it covers the area as per the Territorial Waters, Continental Shelf, Exclusive Economic Zone and Other Maritime Zones Act 1976. So which basically what happens here is it goes up to 200 nautical miles. Now there is one more provision. Supposing you make a supply which is beyond 12 nautical miles, but within the economic zone, it is considered as intrastate supply, not interstate. This is a major thing because this was a demand by the states. They wanted to levy SGST on those cases. Therefore, this definition has been incorporated as the definition of India. In fact, there was a big controversy in customs as to when exactly the levy is attracted. The case right went up to Supreme Court in the case of Garden Silk Mills. What happened was they were arguing that when the ship crosses 12 miles, that nautical miles, our territory, then import has taken place. Supreme Court said no. Now it has to come to the port, bill of entry has to be filed, then only the taxable event will take place. That controversy is no longer in existence. But for the purposes of GST, India is not limited to territorial waters. It goes up right up to the economic zone, exclusive economic zone, which goes up to 200 nautical miles. So this will be treated as intrastate supplies. The next thing we should know is location of recipient of service. Registered place, a fixed establishment, where a supply is received at more than one establishment, the location of the establishment most directly concerned with the receipt of supply. It is considered as location of recipient. In the absence of such places, the location of the usual place of residence of the recipient. So these are all concepts. This is also a concept which we should know what exactly is this location of recipient of service. Now, location of supplier of service, registered premises, location of fixed establishment, which I talked about earlier, the location of establishment most directly concerned with the provision of supply. In the absence of such places, again, residence of the supplier. Now, we come to imports under GST. When we are talking of imports under GST, in the case of both goods and services, the tax is paid by the recipient, that is the importer. He has to pay the IGST and compensation cess wherever applicable. And ITC, input tax credit of both are available if you can use it. Of course, the compensation cess ITC can be used only for compensation cess. However, again, there are exceptions to the rule. In the case of OIDAR service, that is internet through the internet, whatever we import. When they are imported, OIDAR services are imported by a non-taxable or unregistered persons, the supplier has to pay IGST. The question will come, the suppliers like Google or who are not located in India, supposing the supplier of OIDAR service is abroad, then question arises, how will he pay the tax? What the government says is, if you can't pay, you have to pay the tax. You have to make arrangement for this purpose. That means you have to have a representative in India. He has to be registered and he has to pay the tax. So in the case of this service, which is basically internet service, where you download software, you download movies, you download various things. Of course, if it is not for business only, then there is no problem, no tax is to be paid. But if it is meant for business, tax is to be paid. But if a person who has imported is a non-taxable person or unregistered person, the supplier has to pay tax. Similarly, if the government has imported, the supplier has to pay tax. So he has to make arrangements. Now, in the case of imports, no doubt IGST is leviable, because one more concept is, this is basically, I talked of level playing field between the international supplier and the Indian receiver and the Indian supplier. If the same goods is supplied by an Indian trader within the Indian market and by an international trader from whom the goods are imported, both have to have a level playing field. For this purpose, after adding BCD, that is basic customs duty, and social welfare surcharge to the value, we collect IGST separately, because the domestic manufacturer has to pay IGST. To provide a level playing field on the import also, the IGST has to be collected. That is why there is a provision in IGST Act, Section 5, provides for levy of IGST on imported goods or exported goods. Now, when we are talking of levy of IGST on imported goods, naturally the question will arise when it will be paid. It will be paid when the customs duty is collected. That means when the bill of entry is filed for home, we call it home consumption. When a bill of entry is filed, which after assessment, you pay the duty and customs examines the goods and allows it to be brought into the country. This is called clearance for home consumption. Once the goods are cleared for home consumption, it becomes part of the land mass of the country. But before that, the BCD, that is basic customs duty, social welfare surcharge, anti-dumping duty if it is leviable, safeguard duty if it is leviable, countervailing duty if it is leviable, then IGST, all these things will have to be paid. So IGST also is collected at that stage. So what happens is, in the case of imports, the charging section, we call it charging section. We call the import or export as the taxable event. And we call section 5, which says there shall be charged and levied and collected a tax called IGST as the charging section. So this charging section says IGST will be levied and collected when the goods are imported or exported along with the customs duty at the rate specified, etc., etc., etc. So for levy and collection, the machinery of customs law is used. In the port, if you go to Customs Tariff Act, which has got provisions which will explain how IGST has to be collected, how the value has to be arrived at, etc. So the levy, while the charging section, the levy is under IGST Act, the collection mechanism, customs law is used. So levy, therefore, levy and collection of IGST is the point when the bill of entry is filed, not the taxable event is import into India. That means the normal understanding is when the territory is crossed. No, actually when the bill of entry is filed, that is the point when levy and collection takes place. And in the case of IGST, I already told you, the intention is to provide a level playing field. Therefore, for the purpose of levy of IGST, we have taxable value, which is transaction value plus basic customs duty plus other duties. All of them will be added, and thereafter IGST will be levied. When the goods have been kept in the warehouse, IGST will be payable on the value, which is transaction value after goods are cleared from warehouse, or the original value arrived earlier, transaction value plus basic custom duty plus other duties, whichever is higher. So the transaction value is higher, that means goods have been sold while in the warehouse. If that value is higher than the value plus basic customs duty plus other duties already determined in the into bonded warehouse bill, then the higher value will be adopted. If it is lower, that will be adopted. So as usual, in most of the cases, in all things, it is always, if it is higher, if it benefits the government, that will be adopted. In the case of assessee, it will be lower. This is how invariably you will find most of the legal provisions make provisions. I have already said what is the taxable value of warehouse goods. So this is about imports under GST. Now what happens? Import of goods sold on the high seas. So high sea sale is a common practice in the international trade. I buy goods and I sell it to, it leaves the port abroad. It is coming to India. Before it reaches India, I sell it to somebody else. And that person may sell it to somebody else also. So finally, the goods will come and entered for customs clearance by filing a bill of entry. Now, when we are doing the bill of entry, if there are 2-3 high sea sales, 1 high sea sale, 2 high sea sales, 3 high seas, whatever it is, the final price will be the transaction value. And what happens? That will be the all, when you are filing bill of entry, you have to file documentation relating to the entire chain of events. That has to be done. Now, high sea sale, and one more problem will come. Originally, when the GST law was framed, supposing you are in India, you get an order from a person in US and you don't have the goods, but you know that somebody else in China supplies it. What you do is you will tell the Chinese fellow, you send the goods to US to so and so, and you issue the invoice to US fellow. And Chinese person will invoice the goods to you. And goods do not come to India at all. They go directly from China to US. In such a situation, original law before amendment, it would have created a situation where IGST would have been payable. But now the law has been amended. So third country shipment and HSS, both third country shipment, which I explained just now, high sea sale also explained, both are neither supply of goods nor supply of services as per Schedule 3. These problems have been solved. So both high sea sale and third country shipments were creating problem initially, but they have been solved. Now what happens is, in the case of high sea sale, so long as no bill of entry is filed and the Indian customer emerges who has bought the goods, there will be no liability of IGST. Same way, third country shipments also, there is no liability of IGST. I already told that assessable value in the case of goods purchased on high sea sale basis is the value the last HSS buyer, high sea sale buyer, who files the bill of entry for home consumption, that will be the price. And as told earlier, he has to file the entire chain of documents. And there is no IGST on the goods imported by SEZ units and EOUs. This was originally explained. Originally, it was not there for EOUs. Subsequently, it was given for some time. Then it was extended to 31st March 2020. Now it has been extended up to 31st March 2021. Therefore, there is no IGST on goods imported by EOUs and SEZ units. Again, passenger baggage is also import. When you go abroad and come back, if you bring goods, they are liable to tax. But for passenger baggage, IGST and compensation cess are exempted, but the customs duty is 35%, and on that 10% will be social welfare cess you have to pay, and that amount will have to be paid. There is no IGST and compensation cess on passenger baggage. Next, we go to import of services. Where the location of the supplier of service is outside India, location of recipient and the place of supply is in India, it is import of service. In general, import of services without consideration is not a supply. But business test is not required to be fulfilled for supply of service with consideration. However, import of services from a related person or from own establishment for furtherance of business is a supply even if made without consideration. Now, this is where the problem comes. If you bring something for furtherance of business in the course of business from a related person, of course, we are not getting into the definition of related person, etc., etc. That would have been already covered separately. Therefore, if you import from a related person, supposing your brother or father or somebody who is a partner in your firm, or between two directors who are exercising control, or from a country about which, from a company in which you have more than 35%, 25% control, etc., etc. If it is for business purposes, even if it is imported without consideration, it will be liable to tax. Of course, you will have to value it according to valuation rules, but the tax will be leviable. Now we come to exports. We have covered briefly imports. In fact, I have not covered the entire details. These are only glimpses of imports, and we will get a glimpse of exports also. There are detailed provisions, but what we should know is how the imports are treated by and large, so that when such a situation arises, we should know, yes, this is not a straightforward thing. We have to look at this. We have to look at this. Basically, this is the idea of this session. Now we come to exports. As already, the general principle about exports is we do not export taxes. That means whenever exports are made, the taxes are either refunded or goods are allowed to be exported without payment of taxes. So if the taxes are paid, they will be refunded. If the taxes are paid on input, they will be refunded. And if possible, goods will be allowed to be exported without payment of taxes. Of course, there are exceptions here also. The exceptions are, in some cases, we levy export duties. That means there we export the tax also, because we don't want the goods to go out, or we feel we have a better, we don't need it in India, we can export it and earn more, and government wants to take a share of it. Spices are examples. Some spices attract export duty. Iron ore is an example. There are examples. There are very few items on which export duty is levied. Otherwise, by and large, export is not subjected to tax. In fact, we call them zero rated. The difference between an exempt, that is nil rate, and the zero rate is that in the case of zero rate, when we say export is zero rated, it means the taxes on inputs are either refunded or input tax credit of taxes paid on inputs and services is allowed, and it can be used for other purposes. That means for your domestic clearances or for paying taxes on the taxable supplies, it can be used. So this is the meaning of zero rated. Nil rate means the final product will attract nil rate. Whatever credit, you can't take input tax credit according to GST law if the final products are exempt or nil rated. In the case of zero rated, you can take the credit, and if you cannot use it, it will be refunded. Fundamentally, IGST is a destination-based consumption tax. In fact, the GST is a destination-based consumption tax. Therefore, if the place of supply is outside India, you cannot collect IGST. Export with, I already told you, export with levy of export duty are exceptions to this rule. Otherwise, when the consumption is outside, IGST cannot be collected. The exporter has an option to pay IGST, export the goods, and claim refund of tax paid on export, or export on execution of a bond, or a famous term called LUT, letter of undertaking, without payment of tax, and claim refund of ITC. See, these are complete in export. If you don't follow the procedure, you can get into trouble. Procedure is very important. In fact, indirect tax law itself is procedural law, and procedure has to be followed, and you have to know the procedure. And invariably, the department will be very strict in looking into whether you have followed the procedure. Because of the extended meaning given to India, goods have to travel beyond 200 nautical miles for getting treated as export. Now, deemed exports. What are the essential conditions to qualify as a deemed export? One is it's applicable only for the supply of goods, not applicable to services. Next one is goods do not go out of the country. And next one is they have, other than SEZ, they have to be notified under section 147. Goods must be manufactured or produced in India. Payment can be received in Indian rupees, I already told you earlier, where the RBI has permitted, or in convertible foreign exchange. And deemed exports cannot be made under bond or LUT. When we are making a deemed export, SEZ is an exception. Otherwise, for the notified deemed exports, we cannot make supplies under bond or LUT. Tax has to be paid and supplied. And thereafter, the refund has to be obtained. Refund is allowed. The tax must be paid at the time of supply. And refund can be claimed either by the supplier or by the recipient. There is a procedure for that also again. In fact, when you are supplying to SEZ, you have to be very careful. The goods have to go for the authorized things only. Those things, probably I will cover it separately. Supplies notified. What are the supplies which have been notified as deemed exports? Because in these cases, you can get back the taxes paid. One is advance authorization. If somebody has got the advance authorization, he is entitled to import goods without payment of duty. The domestic manufacturer can supply to him against the authorization. There again, the refund will be allowed. Supply made to an export-oriented undertaking in a HTPU or software technology park or biotechnology park. Supply of capital goods by a registered person against export promotion capital goods. We will try to cover these things also quickly today. What is EOU? What is EPCG? What is advance authorization, etc. We'll cover that. The definition of deemed exports under FTP is different from the definition under GST law and should not be considered while applying GST provisions. You have to be very careful, because for the purpose of FTP, when you are applying for advance authorization or EPCG authorization or for MEIS or SCIS, you have to be careful, because the export definition under FTP or the definition of services under FTP, there is a difference between GST and FTP. We have to know it. And while doing it, if you use sometimes the description, many times the description of service or description of goods has to be correct. Sometimes you make a mistake, you may lose money. This also is possible. Therefore, when making exports and with an intention of claiming any benefit, we have to be very careful, and we should know what is the provisions relating to classification, how they are classified, what are the benefits available. So for applying GST provisions, there can be different, it's the same service can be classified differently for the purpose of GST levy and for the purpose of claiming benefit of service export from India scheme, that is called SEIS, where some reward is given, 2% or 3%, 5%, whatever. Now, what happens is quite often a manufacturer exporter has the ability to manufacture, but he doesn't know where is the market. Whereas another fellow is there who has no capacity to manufacture, but he knows where is the market. He can sell. So he is merchant exporter. Merchant exporter means a person engaged in trading activity and he is exporting or intending to export goods. Now what happens is the merchant exporter can export the goods either directly from his own premises, from the premises of the manufacturer himself, or he can ask the manufacturer to send the goods to him and export it under bond or LUT. So this is the manufacturer can supply it under bond or LUT. No, the manufacturer can supply it on payment of 0.1% to the merchant exporter, and merchant exporter can thereafter export it. But there is a condition that either the goods should go directly from the manufacturer to the port, or it should go through a warehouse, that is bonded warehouse where the goods, export goods are kept, and there it can be kept for some time, but it cannot be taken to the domestic place. This is a very important condition. It has to go directly, or it has to go through a customs warehouse, not otherwise. It can go through the merchant exporter's premises also, and within 90 days it has to be exported. This procedure is a very detailed procedure for export through merchant exporter. And if you get any customer who says, I will help you, I can export it, this is a very good thing to use, because you have to pay only 0.1% tax, and you can use the input tax credit, and you can get the refund of input tax credit in respect of these exports, because the merchant exporter has to quote your GSTIN number, your tax invoice number in the shipping bill. He has to quote it. Once he gets the goods under that procedure, he has to quote. So you have to know there's a detailed procedure prescribed. This procedure has to be known and followed meticulously. Then there will be no problem. You can get the refund of the tax paid. You can also get other benefits if some of the benefits will be available only to one of you, either merchant exporter or to you. That has to be seen and availed. And quite often what happens is the merchant exporter buys and sells, and he gets all the benefits like customs drawback he gets, and he gets MEIS if the goods are exported. MEIS he gets. MEIS is Merchandise Exports from India scheme. There also there is a reward of 2%, 3%, 5%. That also he may claim, and you will not be knowing all those things, and he will make much more profit than you. If you know the scheme properly, definitely you can understand how much profit he is making and try to get a portion of it for yourself. And there are conditions. There is another condition that merchant exporter should be registered with an export promotion council or commodity board. Then only he can act as a merchant exporter. Now, I have given the procedure also very briefly. Don't take this as complete, because all the points have not been covered, but quickly I will go through some of the points which I have taken out. One is a copy of the order placed at the concessional rate, because 0.1% is the rate for export through merchant exporter. So a copy of the order placed on the manufacturer has to be provided to jurisdictional tax officer of the registered supplier. I already told that the goods have directly to move to the port or ICD or land custom station or to the registered warehouse, from where it can go to the port. In case the goods are, a merchant exporter may buy goods from multiple registered suppliers, then each one move to a registered warehouse, from where they will move to the port. After the goods are exported, a copy of the shipping bill or bill of export with the proof of EGM, Export General Manifest. Export General Manifest is the proof that goods have been loaded on the aircraft or the ship, because the master of the ship files an Export General Manifest before he leaves the port. Therefore, in the Export General Manifest, for every shipping bill, each and every shipping bill file, every consignment detail will be available. Therefore, the Export General Manifest is the proof, or export report. In the case of Export General Manifest is for vessels, export report is for others, vehicles, aircrafts, etc. Has to be filed, has to be given to the registered supplier as well as to the jurisdictional tax officer, because in the normal course IGST at the normal rate would have been paid, whereas these goods have gone at 0.1%, and therefore the jurisdictional tax officer should be satisfied that these goods have gone to a merchant exporter, and the merchant exporter has in turn exported the same. Sometimes what happens is you subcontract. You get an order, you can't manufacture the entire thing. You tell a person in another country to make a portion of the exported item goods and supply. You may also tell your receiver that a portion of this I have subcontracted. He will manufacture and give it to you. You pay him directly. Now you would have supplied 60%. He would have supplied 40%. 40% money goes to him, and 60% money comes to you. Now what happens? Question comes whereas you have in reality your export value is 100 rupees, but what has happened is 40 rupees has gone to the other person. So government has taken this problem into account. What they have done is they have said in such cases, what they will do is they will treat the subcontractor's work as a service rendered to you. That means you treat it as import of service. You pay whatever tax IGST is to be paid, take the credit, and then whatever export foreign currency has come, that you treat it as export. That means there are two transactions. One is import of service. That imported service becomes part of the exported goods which has gone abroad. Therefore, the value received, even though you have received only 60%, 40% has gone directly to him. For the purpose of calculating your performance or value of export, turnover, etc., you can take the 100 rupees. This is a subcontracting facility given to the exporters. Supply to SEZ unit or SEZ developer are zero rated, but it has to be only for authorized operations. The authorized, if it is not authorized operation, later on you may get into trouble if you export it. Therefore, while exporting to SEZ, we have to know whether they have to get a certificate from the officer. You should have the proof that this is an authorized operation. Normally, when it is permitted, they will say what are all the services he can use, what will be his output, what are the inputs, all those things will be there. So such a certificate you should have. This is, otherwise you simply send it to SEZ and later on you may have to pay the tax which was not paid. Unnecessarily you can get into problems. Supplies to EOUs are treated as deemed exports, but there you have to pay the tax and export it, and thereafter either the EOU can claim refund or you can claim refund. Most of the time, if you can pay the tax and export the goods and claim refund of the tax. But what happens is many times people think that government doesn't pay the refund quickly, this problem. But I am told in the recent, after the GST was introduced and in the past 1 or 2 years, it has become very easy to get the refund after payment of tax and export rather than claiming refund of input tax credits, which is available after export, which is surplus credit. There are two methods of doing it. One is you pay the tax and export the goods, then claim that as a refund. In that case, the customs house through which you have exported, they will give the refund. There also 90% is given within a week, the remaining is given afterwards. The same principle as in the other refunds. In the other method, you export the goods under bond or LUT. LUT is letter of undertaking, which I already told you. Then in that case, you can export it without payment of tax. And thereafter, if you have surplus credit, you can claim refund. Of course, there is a complicated procedure to claim the refund, which is available in GST law. and you have to go through that and claim refund. Now, about bond and LUT. One is, normally you can execute what is known as a running bond or a running LUT. Bond is required to be given if the person has been prosecuted for an offense of involving more than 2 crores 50 lakhs. Otherwise, bond is not required. Bond has to be on a stamp paper, and then some security is to be given. All those conditions are there. So LUT is letter of undertaking. It is a simple letter where you say, I will export, and this is, I will ensure that if the goods are not exported, I will pay the tax, so on and so forth. That letter of undertaking you can file, and normally one letter of undertaking will be valid for 1 year. And similarly, in the case of bond, you can have a running bond. You can go on exporting so long as the bond covers the amount. You can keep in account. So validity period for LUT is 1 year. Every year you have to file a fresh one, and online it can be filed online. And if it is not accepted within 3 days or a specific period, it is considered as deemed to have been accepted. So you don't have to bother. Bond in place of LUT, I already mentioned. 15% security has to be provided. Running bond can be provided. And sealing, of course, where self-sealing is not available, where self-sealing they want to introduce. We had already, when I was there also, it was there. Self-sealing they want to introduce, but till then, the sealing by officers can continue. In case of sealing is to be done, you get it sealed, and export proceeds have to be realized within 6 months or extended period from RBI. All these conditions have to be fulfilled. This is export under bond. So now we have briefly covered what is export, what is import, what is deemed export. Of course, I have not gone into the legal problem because each one issue is a one session. Merchant exporter can be probably one session full if you want to learn the whole thing. So each one can be a full thing, but we have got a glimpse of everything. That was the idea, integrated role of GST and customs, how they are linked. So now we come to export promotion schemes. See, as every country wants to export more. Export brings you foreign currency, and with the money you can import, and we have a trade deficit. Therefore, we have to promote export. Therefore, foreign trade policy comes with export promotion schemes. Now, we will look at some of the schemes, not some, almost everything with a quick glance. First one is advance authorization export promotion scheme. There are two schemes. One is advance authorization. Second one is called duty-free import authorization. Now, what is advance authorization? You can import inputs which are to be used in the manufacture of export products, and these imports can be imported without payment of customs duties. Now, quantity, in the case of advance authorization, you can give your own norms, you can give your own requirement also, but SIAN will be easier, which is what I explained earlier. And these manufactured products, you can also supply against advance authorization of others, EPCG, 100% EOUs also. Export obligation, you import today, within 18 months, you have to fulfill the export obligation. Export proceeds have to come in freely convertible foreign currency. Like I said earlier, if it is otherwise permitted, it can come in Indian currency, for example, Nepal and others. It can be as per SIAN or declaration. What are the inputs that can be imported? Imports, fuel, oil, catalysts, mandatory space to the extent of 10%. You can import. One thing we have to remember in advance authorization is it is actual user condition. Inputs have to be used by you only. They cannot be sold as such. If they are sold as such, the customs duty will have to be paid. Therefore, but the goods manufactured out of that, after fulfilling the export obligation, if they are remaining, if the value addition is higher, you can sell in the domestic market. Waste and scrap also can be sold in the domestic market on payment of duty. And normally this advance authorization cannot be sold in the market. Manufacturer exporter or merchant exporter tied with a supporting manufacturer is eligible for this scheme. It is not necessary that you should import. You can source in the domestic market also. That will come also without payment of duty. Quantity used in export product has to be furnished in the shipping bill. This was not there earlier. In fact, they have tightened many things. Earlier, advance authorization, you don't have to give anything. You export the finished product and show the value addition. That was enough. Now what they have done is they have said that what are the inputs used, you have to show quantity, how much quantity has been used, what is the name of the input, everything you have to show. If it doesn't tally, you will have a problem. So this shipping bill has to be endorsed by customs for redemption. So this is, you have to be very careful because description of the goods have to be correct, quantity has to tally, and anything you miss, you will have to pay tax with interest. Annual advance authorization is also allowed. That means they will give you one permission for the requirement of 1 year. You can keep on importing. And value addition required is 15%. This is about advance authorization. This used to be called advance license earlier. Now, of course, it cannot be sold. Earlier, this used to be sold also. There are cases where, especially the main thing was steel. People will import the grade 302 or 305, there is a steel. They will import it, sell it in the market, and thereafter make some utensils, etc., send it to some African country or Dubai, and that is the end of it. There used to be a lot of mischief going on in this advance authorization scheme. They will say goods are with job worker, and job worker will not be existing. All kinds of problems used to be there. It was misused quite a lot, but they have tightened many things now. It is not so easy to do it. It is very risky to do it also. Now, especially, they have tightened the process. Now we come to DFIA, duty-free import authorization. Now this will be as per SIAN norms only. That means only as per SIAN norms, standard input-output norms. And there is no exemption of IGST, etc. Only BCD is exempt. It can be done post-export basis also. You export first, then get the authorization in DFIA, that can be sold. The script can be sold in the market. Similarly, for each SIAN input, for each port, separate script is issued and it can be sold. Within 12 months of application, exports have to be made, giving the details of application. That means if you have applied, you want to get a post-export DFIA script, you have to give the application to DGFT in advance and quote that application number while making the exports. After 1 year, you can get the DFIA script. We call it script. So thereafter, transferable DFIA will be issued within 12 months of export or within 6 months of realization of proceeds, whichever is later. So if the proceeds have to come, then only they will give the script. Without script, without proceeds, they will not give the script. This script will be valid for 12 months. You can sell it or you can import items which you want to import. There is no actual user condition. Therefore, no problem. Usage of inputs has to be established when you are exporting. Value addition required here is 20%. When we talk of this, whether it is MEAS script or SEAS script or DFIA script, these are all available in the market for sale. Now the problem is GST is also exempt. You can sell them. But the problem is if it is found that it has been obtained by fraud, you will lose the benefit. That means you may have to pay the duty also. If you have imported something and use the script to pay the duty, you may have to pay. Therefore, whenever we buy these scripts, just because they are cheaper, they are available at a discount, and there are brokers selling them, we have to be very careful. Some due diligence has to be exercised, and it is always better to buy this kind of scripts from known people who will not run away tomorrow. This script misuse was rampant earlier. Now, of course, I am not in touch. When I was in the department, it used to be quite rampant, and it was a big racket going on. There are people who have done crores of turnover in this scripts itself, and there are people who have made crores in acting as a broker. This is about the scripts. transferable scripts. Advanced authentication is not transferable. DFIA is transferable. Earlier we used to have what is known as DEPB. Now it is DFIA. DFIA was there earlier also, but DEPB has been discontinued. Then we come to, there are two schemes called reward schemes. Now, recently, I think last month, the Commerce Minister announced that the reward schemes will be discontinued. And for each product for which this is available, the persons have to apply for refund. They will have an estimation of how much products have been used, what is the amount of duty or taxes that have to be refunded. He had also said that you should give the details. Industry bodies should give the details, and slowly we will take it out. Of course, thereafter the lockdown came, coronavirus. Now everybody is busy with corona, so this has taken a back seat. But this is all these schemes, export promotion schemes, other countries object. Each country will raise objections that this is not there, this is incentive. You are not supposed to give incentive. You are supposed to refund only the taxes. All these conditions are there because WTO norms have to be fulfilled. So this MEAS has been questioned by some in the WTO. I think because of that, because of the WTO only, we had to discontinue DEPB scheme. The same way MEAS and SEAS also have to be discontinued because of objections in WTO. Now they are going to discontinue, but as of now, they are in existence. And I don't know how long they will be in existence, but there will be some other scheme. But the only thing is the amount of refund, the amount of incentive that you are getting may come down, because the reason why we were giving this incentive, I will be coming to later. But the chances are this will go and something else will come, and that will be less. If you see the drawback scheme, the drawback also earlier used to be very liberal. Then because of WTO and other problems in other countries, now the customs rules, if you read, it's, of course, I am not covering drawback because drawback is basically and exclusively customs, and today's subject is GST and customs, where both are involved only I am talking. That's why I omitted drawback. Otherwise, earlier the drawback rate could be fixed very liberally, but now there are so many requirements. If you see the drawback rules, you will come to know how difficult it is. So, and not only that, if somebody asks, we'll have to show that this is how I have worked out. So that is also necessary. Same thing will come to MEAS also. As of now, simply they have fixed a percentage, but tomorrow it may not happen. So the same problem which we have with drawback may come here also. Anyway, these are things which keep going on. We keep trying to come out with schemes, and somebody will object, and it keeps going on. This is something like hide and seek game. Anyway, now we come to reward schemes. The first one is MEIS. The objective of MEIS, what is the objective of MEIS? Is to provide rewards to exporters for offsetting infrastructural inefficiencies, which we have plenty, and associated costs involved in export of goods and products which are produced or manufactured in India. Now, under MEIS, I will go through quickly because this is going to go. The only thing is, it is a very good scheme. And if somebody has not availed, you should think of looking at it, whether you are eligible. Because I have come to know that there were many people who were not claiming it, and they were entitled to crores, and they totally missed it. So this kind of things have happened in MEIS and SEIS. Therefore, whoever is involved in exporting goods or services, they have to look at these schemes, whether I am eligible, whether I can get. And there is a lot of time available to file it also. And there's nothing to lose much, because if you get it, fine. If you don't get it, the worst thing that will happen is you will not get it. That's all, nothing more. So it is better to spend some time. It may not take a long time to understand whether you are eligible or not. But this is a good scheme. Both of them are very good schemes. And I think people should, whoever is involved in export, should look at this. Anyway, with this introduction, I will go through quickly what is MEAS. Under MEAS, export of notified goods, the goods are notified, the list of goods are available to notified markets will be eligible for rewards in the form of duty credit scripts. Now, these credits can be used only for BCD. Earlier, it was allowed for excise duty and all those things. Now, I think it's only for BCD. Realized FOB value or value in the shipping bill, whichever is lower, is used for calculating the reward. If the realized FOB value is less than the shipping bill value, then that will be taken. Whichever is less, I told you earlier, when it comes for in relation to the money which has to go to government, it will be whichever is higher. If it is something has to go to the assessee or taxpayer, it will be whichever is lower. So here also it is whichever is lower. The scrip issued is valid for 24 months from the date of issue. It can be used for payment of basic customs duty for anything, any item. It is freely transferable. You can sell it in the market. There is a good market available. People are ready to buy. Only thing is you will have to sell it at a discount. There is no GST on the scrip. In case of export of goods through courier or foreign post office using e-commerce, FOB value up to 5 lakhs per consignment will be entitled. Supposing you export 25 lakhs, it will be limited to 5 lakhs. It was 25,000 or 50,000 earlier. It has been increased now. Then ineligible categories. SEZ units not available. Deemed exports not available. In the case of SEZ, EOU, EHTP, BPT, FTWZ products. FTW is Free Trade Warehousing Zone. Free Trade and Warehousing Zone. Products exported through DTA units. If they export through the DTA unit, it is available. Export through transshipment, not available. Export products which are subject to export duty or minimum export price, not available. Exports made by units in FTWZ, not available. So these are ineligible categories. Then we come to reward scheme. I told you there are two twins. One is for the goods, another one is for the services. Earlier it was called Served from India scheme. Now it has become SEIS, Service Exports India scheme. Now, the objective of SEIS again is same, to encourage export of notified services from India. Under SEIS, service providers of notified services will be eligible for rewards in the form of duty credit scripts. The rates are 3%, 5%. In the case of MEIS also it is 2, 3, 5, etc. It applies to service providers located in India. The invoice, you have to be very clear. The invoice description has to match with the notified services list. If it doesn't match, you will not get it. This is very strict. They are very strict about it. Minimum net free foreign exchange earned in the year of rendering service to eligible for duty credit scrip is for individual service providers and sole proprietorship $10,000, others $15,000. The scrip issued in net foreign exchange earned by the unit. How do you calculate net foreign exchange? That is given here. Net foreign exchange is equal to gross earnings in foreign exchange relating to service sector in the financial year minus total expenses in foreign exchange by you. This is how it has to be calculated. Then we come to ineligible categories. Export turnover relating to services of units operating in SEZ, EOU, EHTP, STPI, BTP schemes, or supply of services made to such units. Clubbing of turnover of services rendered by SEZ, EOU, EHTP, STPI, BTP units with turnover of DTA service providers, not allowed. Service providers in telecom sector, no. Payment of services rendered from EEFC account, no. If the payment comes from an EEFC account, service, this scheme will not be applicable. I think, what is EEFC account? You have exported something. The government allows to keep the foreign currency abroad in an account called EEFC account. That means it will be in the foreign currency denomination only. It will not be in Indian denomination. You can use it for payment also, but that money, if you pay to an Indian importer, you can pay. It is definitely permitted, Indian exporter. but he cannot claim SEIS. As in the case of MES, the reward scripts under SEIS will not carry any actual user condition and are freely transferable and usable for all types of goods and services, including payment of import duties. This is what it is. Excise and service tax are no longer there. Now we come to the last of the reward scheme. We have what is known as status holders. Now this is given by DGFT to achievers of exports. In this scheme, we'll look at what are the types of scheme, what are the benefits. We'll discuss very quickly. Status holders are business leaders who have excelled in international trade and have successfully contributed to countries' foreign trade. Status holders are expected not only to contribute towards India's exports, but also provide guidance and hand-holding to new enterprises. This is what is stated in the foreign trade policy about status holders. Now, DGFT awards status holder position to the exporters on the basis of export performance in the current year and previous 3 years. That means current year's performance and the previous 3 years' performance is taken into account. And export performance is counted on the total FOB or FOR. FOB is free on board, free on rail value, including deemed exports. In this case, deemed export is also included. Now, if your export performance is 3 million in the average of past 3 years, every year you should have completed 3 million. If you have done it, you will get 1 star. 25 million, 2 stars, up to 25 million. 100 million, 3 star. Then 500 million, 4 star. 2000 million, 5 star. This is how the stars are given. Now, what are the privileges of these status holders? They are entitled to some privileges. Of course, many times people say that some of the privileges are only in the name and they really don't get it. Anyway, this is something which I am not exactly able to comment because I am no longer in the department. If I was in the department, I would have known. But when we were there also, the status problem was there. And nobody ever came and claimed that I am a status holder. And we also never bothered. But nowadays, definitely there is more awareness. And you should know what are the benefits available and use them. The problem is, many times the facilities available have to be claimed and used. Even mother doesn't give milk to the child unless it cries. So just because I have some say status export awarded by DGFT and some letter has been written to customs, if we think that customs will say, okay, come, red carpet, welcome, it doesn't happen, especially in government. Therefore, you have to know what are the facilities you are entitled to and how to claim them and claim it. This is important. And if you have not applied for status, you have to apply. That also may be required. Because many times people don't know and they don't bother. So we have to do that. Now, first one is GR forms up to the limit of 10 lakhs or 2% of average annual export realization. You can claim waiver. Otherwise, for every export, you have to go to RBI, get this GR form, and that is how the RBI will monitor whether you have realized the export proceeds or not. Export proceeds have to be realized. If they are not realized, for example, if it is drawback, they will issue a show cause notice and recover the drawback. Similarly, other benefits also, if the proceeds do not come, you will get into trouble. They will not allow. So that is why in this case, but then you have to have this form. If the form is there, they will monitor. Now, in this case, if you are a status holder, they believe you to this extent. They will not say, okay, no, you take the form and then you produce the form, all those conditions, inform us, produce proof to me, file it, all those things will not be there. Licenses, certificates, permissions, customs clearance is allowed both for exports and imports on self-declaration basis. So many times self-declaration, they would require an attested declaration or a certificate from the department, etc. That may not be required. In many places, it is clearly mentioned also that if he is a status holder, he doesn't have to give a bank guarantee, or he doesn't have to, he gives a bond, that is enough. No security is required, and self-declaration is enough. Otherwise, they will require a certificate. For example, SIAN norms you take. SIAN norms, CFE declare, that's enough. Otherwise, you have to follow SIAN, or you have to get, there is something called norms committee in the DGFT. They have to approve your whatever is the input output ratio. All those problems are there. So self-declaration is allowed for exports and imports. Status holders are exempted from submitting bank guarantee for, I already mentioned it. Negotiating export bills through a bank is not compulsory. This is a good advantage. However, the export process should be routed through banking channels. 2-star export houses and above, not the 1-star house, 2 and above are permitted to establish warehouses as per guidelines of Revenue Department. Now, getting a warehouse license is not exactly very easy. There are norms prescribed, and at the commissioner's level, your application has to be processed and approved, whether it is public bonded warehouse or private bonded warehouse or special warehouse. So in this case, you are, as per the guidelines of the Revenue Department, it will be easy for a status holder to get the warehouse, because warehouse gives you a great advantage in the sense that you can keep the goods, you can import in bulk, keep it without payment of customs duty and other duties, and use it as and when you require. That way, working capital savings is possible. Therefore, it's a good benefit and a great benefit. Then we come to reward schemes, privileges of status holders. In the case of reward schemes, privileges 3-star export houses and above are entitled for the benefits of ACP. This is now called AEO, Authorized Export Operators. Here you get a preference. And there are many privileges given there. You can refer to AEO program of customs. There it will say what are the privileges available. 3, 4, and 5-star holders can self-certify their manufactured goods as originated from India. Rules of origin. In rules of origin, normally an agency has to certify that these are manufactured in India. In the case of 3, 4, 5-star holders, they themselves can certify that they are manufactured in India, and they will qualify for preferential treatments under foreign trade agreements, CECA, CEPA, all those things, where concessional rates of duties are available. Eligible for fixation of input-output norms on priority basis within 60 days. Otherwise, it can take hell of a lot of time. And in the case of status holders, it will be done within 60 days. Normal repatriation period for export proceeds, normally 6 months. I had told you earlier, it is 360 days for export houses. Then we come to EPCG scheme. This is Export Promotion Capital Goods Scheme. This is, you can import capital goods. It allows import of capital goods for pre-production, production, and post-production at zero customs duty. Authorization holder also may procure capital goods from indigenous sources. What does it allow? Capital goods including CKD, SKD condition. This is very widely used EPCG scheme. Computer software systems, spares, molds, etc. Import of capital goods for project imports notified by CBEC is also allowed. Import under what is the, it is subject to obligation of exports equivalent to 6 times of duty saved within 6 years. You have to fulfill from the date of authorization, and authorization once given will be valid for 18 months from the date of issue. Normally no revalidation. Second-hand capital goods will not be permitted. EPCG scheme covers manufacturing exporters with or without supporting manufacturers, merchant exporters tied to supporting manufacturers, and service providers. Export obligation, how do we calculate? It is over and above the average level of exports achieved by the applicant in the preceding 3 licensing years. Because you buy machine and how do you arrive at the norm? That is based on the average exports of 3 previous years of similar products within the overall period. Such average would be the arithmetic mean of export performance in the preceding 3 licensing years. In case of indigenous sourcing, specific EO shall be 25% less. Export obligation is 25% less if you manage with the indigenous machinery, EPC, capital goods. Shipment under advance authorization, DFIA, drawback scheme, reward schemes also will count. Everything will count. For fulfillment of export obligation, export has to be physical export. Deemed exports also will be counted. You have to see those paragraphs in foreign trade policy. Then EPCG license can be invalidated in favor of the domestic supplier, wherein such supplier can procure the imported components against the advance license duty-free and pass on the exemption to EPCG holder. GST levied can be claimed as exempt. So post-export also, you can get the EPCG duty credit scrip. This scheme facilitates units to avail the benefit of duty saved under EPCG license without being bound by export obligation condition. Post-export credit strips will be available to exporters who intend to import capital goods on full payment of applicable duties in cash and choose to opt for this scheme. Basic customs duty paid on capital goods shall be remitted in the form of freely transferable duty credit scrips. Here also you will get duty, freely transferable duty. Only thing is EO will be 85% of the, it is less actually applicable specific EO under the obligation scheme, because here you are paying duty and getting it. However, average EO shall remain unchanged. Duty remission shall be in proportion to the EO fulfilled. So these are the various schemes available under the GST and this. But problem, I already mentioned one problem, IGST credit, because they have specified only bill of entry. Recently there was an incident. Suddenly they amended the duty rates in respect of many products, mainly automobile parts, from 18% to 28%. So IGST went up and many people missed it. A lot of importers missed it in India. And finally, one day DRI found out. DRI is Directorate of Revenue Intelligence. It's an organization under customs, CBIC. So this organization found out and they called the CHs. CHs are custom house agents. Most of the exports and imports are made through custom house agents. They called the CHs and told them that you tell the importer to pay the tax. Now the CHs told DRI wants the money, pay it. This is the amount we want the DD. Many of the importers simply pay. The reputation of DRI is such that invariably if you have an experience with DRI, you don't want to go to them again. One is it's a very professional organization. Second is they are very powerful. And third is they have established a reputation, and generally people are scared. They don't want to go near them. So the moment they said DRI, you make the payment. Now, what is the consequence of this? No doubt you are liable to make the payment, but the money is gone. Even though it is IGST, you pay it through a challan, you can't take the credit. In the normal course, if you pay the differential IGST in the earlier time, in the excise duty era, excise era, you could have taken the credit because challan was a recognized document. Now the challan is not there in the list. Consequently, if you simply make the payment, you don't have a document on the basis of which you can take the credit. Therefore, the only solution, at least in future also, whenever a duty demand is made for differential duty, even if it is BCD, invariably the corresponding IGST also will go up. If it is a bona fide mistake and if no offense like fraud, misdeclaration with intention to evade duty is alleged and extended period is not invoked, you are entitled to credit. Therefore, you have to say, issue me a demand or reassess the bill of entry, I will make the payment. When they reassess the bill of entry, you will get another document on the basis of which you will make the payment, and that document will show the differential duty. So you can pay the duty and take the credit. So what happens is this kind of advice will not come. The department is not interested. They are interested in collecting the money. CHA is not interested because CHA is interested in keeping himself in the good books of customs. That is his priority. Even though he is supposed to serve you also, but his priority is he doesn't want to displease the customs officers, especially DRI. He doesn't want to do it. So in such cases, you have to get professional advice. Many times, especially in customs, the matter is entirely left to CHAs, who many times they are supposed to know the law. They have to pass an exam called the G card, H card. There are different types of cards. They have to pass exam. They have to appear for interview. All those things are there. But then after passing the exam, and that is the end of it, and it is not a continuous learning is not there. And in any case, his specialty is not utilizing the knowledge and giving you advice, even though according to customs regulations, he is supposed to advise you correctly. But it is always better not to rely entirely on him, because customs laws have become very strict now. Payment of duty, bill of entry has to be filed within a day. Earlier, when I was commissioner, you could file bill of entry anytime. There was no time limit fixed. Now if you don't file within 1 month, there is penalty. And if you don't pay duty, there is penalty. If you don't file bill of entry, there is penalty. Oh, then it has become very tough. So every day makes a difference. And if you are a GST person, eligibility of credit and then correct description. Fortunately, GST also uses customs tariff only. Therefore, there should not be a difference between the tariff description for the purpose of customs and for the purpose of IGST. That is a saving grace. Otherwise, it would have become worse. So in all these cases, whenever there is a payment of differential duty, now, for example, in IGST law also, it is there. If you pay the tax because of suppression, fraud, misdeclaration, where extended period has been invoked, like section 74, 129, etc., you cannot take the credit. So that problem will be there. This is one of the links between GST and IGST, because there can be many other instances, but I think the time is running out and you may have questions to ask. Therefore, I am stopping here. I hope I was audible throughout, because in the middle sometimes the mic goes this way, that way. I hope I have been audible and you have been able to listen to me fully. I would like to thank you all for the patience and consideration to hear me out fully, and hope it has been useful. It has been a useful session. Thank you.
Murthy sir,
Yes, please.
there are a couple of questions here. I will
Yes.
ask you one by one, so you
Okay.
can answer this. If a company provides services to its holding company outside India, whether it is a export or not.
Holding company and subsidiary companies are considered as separate. They are not, a branch is different. Holding company and subsidiary companies are different. I think there is no problem. It can be claimed. It can be considered as export.
Next question. Please explain again what when ship comes, enters 200 nautical miles range, then what will be the impact on imports?
In fact, there will be no impact. Till what happens is they have to file an IGM. When a ship comes, before coming, they will file an IGM. IGM is filed. IGM is Import General Manifest. Import General Manifest will have the details of all the goods in the ship. Every bill, every item will be there. It is called item number. There will be thousands of items, and for each item, there will be a monitoring system. A bill of entry has to be filed. While giving the bill of entry, what we call a line number. It's called line number. Each entry is called a line number. A bill of entry has to be filed. Therefore, when the IGM is filed, IGM will show what are the goods which are going to be unloaded in the Indian port, which is it is approaching. So even if it comes near 10 miles also, it doesn't mean. That's what I was explaining earlier also. The taxable event takes place only when the bill of entry is filed. When it is kept in the customs area, it is still imported goods. It has not, only when it is cleared after filing bill of entry and payment of taxes and what we call out of charge. The customs officer, after getting the bill of entry on which the duty has already been paid, the details of goods will be available, and customs assessing system, risk management system would have given directions, or the officer who has assessed would have given directions. They will go through all these things and find out whether any examination is required, samples examination is required, everything they will do. And thereafter, if nothing is there, he says yes, he is satisfied that the description is fine, exemption claimed is fine, tax paid is okay, everything is fine, he will give out of charge. Once out of charge is given, you are entitled to take the goods out of the port. That is the stage when the import is over. If the ship has come, it can go back from there itself. Also, it can go back, and even if it has come and only if it is unloaded to something else and it is brought to the India. See, there is another section, I think it is section 29 or whatever it is in customs. Every ship has to come to the port only. It cannot go anywhere else. So therefore, what happens is if the ship unloads something in any place other than the port, then what happens is it becomes smuggling and separate action will be initiated. Therefore, if a ship comes to the 200 nautical miles area or wherever it is, so long as it is in the sea, nothing happens. When the goods are unloaded and thereafter bill of entry is filed, then only question of home consumption comes. The taxable event takes place when it is crosses, the bill of entry is filed. If no bill of entry is filed, then what happens? The customs gives a notice, not the customs, the custodian gives a notice, and thereafter the auction goods will be auctioned, customs duty will be paid, and the person who has bought it in the auction will take it. This is how the system works.
Next question, my client exports to Bhutan. Person from Bhutan comes, he gives the order and pays the amount in cash, and I arrange for the transport of the goods, send the same for the customs where all the procedure are completed. What is the nature of the supply? Sale of goods to a person in Nepal, sir.
See, but has a bill of export is filed or not? That is the question, no? See, a bill of export, in the case of when it is crossing the border, you have to file a bill of export. If that has been filed and money proof, in this case, the only problem will be proof of receipt of money. That will be the problem. How do you prove it? Now, in case he pays the cash and whether it is illegal, if RBI permission is there, then there is no problem. Otherwise, you tell him to take a DD and give it to you so that it comes through the bank channel. That is another way. Otherwise, if RBI has permitted payment of cash, there is no problem. The only difficulty here will be proof of export. Bill of export would have been filed. You have to file. And then, of course, in the case of Bhutan, you may be able to take it without filing bill of export also. I don't know, because the borders are all porous and Bhutan is a very friendly country. and Indians command a lot of respect there. So therefore, there may be no problem at all. But even then, if you file a bill of export, and if you have received the cash, and if you can show that you have received the cash, that will be counted as export, because both exports to Nepal and Bhutan are counted as exports. I think you should not lose any benefit. Try to see how it can be done.
Sir, before which geographical line IC sales can happen?
There's no specific line as such. Normally, this is done before the ship, in what we call entry inwards. An entry inwards is granted. See, the ship comes, the IGM is filed, and our customs officer boards the ship. He goes to the ship, he boards the ship, and thereafter he collects the details. There are some details to be given by the master of the vessel. He collects it, and entry inwards is entered in the system. Once the entry inwards is entered in the system, that means the ship has entered India. Thereafter, the sale may not take place, because one thing is, the problem will be if the ship doesn't get the notification about the sale. I already mentioned about line number. The details will be there. The bill of lading will have the name of the person. Now the shipping company will have to issue an amendment. They have to issue the amendment to the bill of lading and make the purchaser in the high sea as the buyer. Now, once the entry inwards is granted, even they may not do it, because there can be problems for them also. Therefore, normally till entry inwards is granted, they may do. In fact, this is a part which I have see. What happens is, at higher level you come to know when there is a problem, and this problem has not come till now. IC sales, invariably the person who has purchased buys the goods, and as far as customs is concerned, whoever is the importer who says I am the importer and files the bill of entry, customs will accept it. And if it is a IC sale, he has to show the proof of invoices and the chain of documents, everything. If he produces it, customs has no problem with it. The only problem will be with the delivery. Therefore, so long as you can get the bill of lading amended, I don't see any problem. And line number also may have to be amended, because the customer name, your name will not be there. The moment you file a bill of entry, they will say, where is your name? Then you have to file for the amendment. That will be the problem. So there are other complications, but by and large, I think before entry inwards, it should be possible.
Sir, as no GST is levied for the import of goods by SEZ or EOU, is it for both the transactions, whether imported from outside India or from domestic tariff area? Question is two parts, sir. This IGST, levy of IGST on goods imported by SEZ and EOU, whether the benefit is available for both.
See, as far as imported by SEZ or 100% EOU, when it comes from abroad, they will file the bill of entry and they will import, and exemption they will claim, because up to 31/3/2021 exemption is available. There is no problem. This is the first part. As far as domestic supply is concerned, it will not be an import for the SEZ. It will be an export for the domestic unit. So what happens is, either a bill of export will be filed by the domestic unit, or in the case of 100% EOU, they will pay the duty and send it on invoice, because 100% EOU is only a deemed export, and there the facility of zero rating is not available. You have to pay the duty and then claim refund. That is the only system for 100% EOU. Therefore, what happens is, when it is going from India to SEZ or EOU, especially SEZ, it is considered as a foreign country. Therefore, when I send it to export, SEZ, it is export. And when I send it to EOU, it is deemed export, because EOU is supposed to only export. This is how the understanding goes. It will not be considered that what is taken out from India to the SEZ or EOU is import by SEZ or EOU, because they are on the Indian side. That is why the GST levy is attracted, and exemption notification also will be required, or the treatment question also arises in the case of SEZ. And this is how it works.
Sir, related to outsourcing of export of service. In your example, you said import of service will be of 40 rupees and RCM would be paid by the recipient in India. What will be his value of export? Is it 100 rupees or only 60 rupees?
Full 100. That is why it is treated as two transactions, and one he treats it as RCM. See, theoretically what they think is, what in the normal course what would have happened? You subcontracting you have done. The goods you send it to that person. That person does the work, sends it back to you. You assemble everything and send it abroad. This is what should have been done. Basically, this is not required. Even if you don't do it, we will treat you like that so long as this kind of transaction happens. That is what they have done. In fact, there was another thing also, job work for repairs. Earlier, there was a problem because there was no notification for it. And when it comes for repair, the question was, the export will not happen if the goods of the recipient has to be worked upon. If the goods of the recipient has to be tested or has to be repaired, etc., it will not be an export of service. This was the problem that they have amended the law. Now, because of that, job work for repairs, import for repair, reconditioning, etc., can be done as a job work without payment of import duty. You can get it, repair it, and send it, and that service is treated as export of service. Whereas some time back it was not so. There was no exemption notification. It was creating problem for India. Same thing about intermediary. For that, they have not found a solution yet. Because if you are working as an intermediary, even if you even though it's a destination based consumption tax, even if the benefit is consumed abroad, if in the case of intermediary, it becomes supplier's place is the place of supply, and that problem is yet to be solved. That is why it's told earlier that you have to be careful when you are acting as an intermediary or agent to treat your service as export or import. You have to be careful.
Next question, sir. This is export of goods through courier. So there is some error in the GSTR1 that is rectified, but the goods exported after the payment of IGST. So if now we have to rectify the scrolls, the proper officer, who is the proper officer?
See, the courier has to make an application to the assistant commissioner. There is an assistant commissioner in customs who will be in charge of courier exports and imports. In fact, there is a courier cell in the airport. So the concerned assistant commissioner will be there. He will have to allow the amendment and amendment of scroll. Basically, in the case of normally, this is just like amending the shipping bill or a bill of entry. You amend the particular serial number, and that is how it will have to be done.
Okay. How different is DFIA from that of MEIS?
MEIS is you export and you get 2%, 3%, or 5% depending upon the list of notified goods and notified market. In the case of DFIA, it is not. It is based on SIAN. SIAN is the list of inputs. You import those inputs and export it as per the SIAN norm and apply for DFIA, they will give it to you. Or you export it and they are making an application and claim it post-export. Both are possible. But in the case of DFIA, it is only SIAN based, because after the export is over, you can sell the script. Whereas in advance authorization, you can't sell the script. In MEIS, nothing will be seen. They have specified that if you have exported this item, you will get 2%. If you have exported this item, 3%. The only thing that will be seen is FOB value. That's all. Otherwise, nothing else is seen. The description of the goods, the notified market, notified goods, and the value. Only these three are required. In the case of DFIA, so many other things are required. You have to be a manufacturer. You have to be, otherwise you have to have a supporting manufacturer. And the inputs, what are the inputs you are exporting? There should be an endorsement in the shipping bill, etc., etc.
Sir, when entry inward is granted, can a sale happen thereafter, but before presentation of the bill of entry? What kind of sale is called for?
In that case, what happens is he has to see what happens is it becomes highly complicated because you have to apply for amendment of IGM, amendment of bill of lading. It becomes too complicated. The easier one will be you allow the bill of entry to be filed by the person who has imported and take the goods, and you pay the tax, etc. That will be the easier thing to do rather than getting into a high C sale system. Because in the high C sale system, one thing is your value also will go up. That will suffer customs duty, IGST, etc. Number one, even if the value doesn't go up, customs will invariably add 2%. Even if supposing high C sale takes place, I sell it to you and I don't add any commission or anything. I simply sell it to you at the same price. Even then, customs will add 2%. And for fighting for 2% becomes a problem. Therefore, after entry inwards, instead of getting into complications, it will be easier to manage the other way. Ultimately, you have to see the practical side also. Whether that is possible or not, I am not very sure. But legally, if you look at it in the light of Garden Silk Mills case, till bill of entry is filed, I don't see any problem. But then there are other complications. Therefore, it is better to ensure that the high C sale is real high C sale.
Next question, sir. When the goods are imported and then having found defective are to be sent back to foreign country for replacement, what are the implications, sir?
Implications are that within 1 month, if you are sending it back, there is a section called 26A. You can claim refund. That's all. And otherwise, if it is submitted later, again the drawback rules will apply. Whatever the drawback rules, if you have used it, that will happen. If you have not used it, all those things will come. That is how it goes. There is a procedure for it.
Okay.
Defective goods itself is specified in section 26A to send it back. Within 1 month, you can send it back, or you can and file a refund claim. You get the refund of the tax paid. And next, I think period can be extended by Assistant Commissioner by 3 months or something like that. It is there. So that section can be used. If that section cannot be used, then you have to go back to the drawback section, where you can send it back and claim the drawback. You say you have not used the machine. If you have not used the machine, 98% drawback is available. You send it back. But then there are other complications. You have to give reasons, period. All those things are there. Nothing is as easy as it sounds, but possible.
So there are a couple of questions, sir. We will send the answers to them through mail.
Okay, fine. Fine then. So we come to the end of the session.
Yes, sir. Karan.
Yes, sir, we can conclude. I would like to thank all the participants for being present, and thanks to Murthy sir for enlightening us on the topic. Thank you, sir.
Thanks to all the participants from my side also. Good day. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.